What's up, guys, and welcome to episode 2 of the next chapter.
All right, so we'll get started with like a chapter summary. We read the first law of atomic habits, and that's essentially like the second chapter. And we last left off with this notion of a habit loop, where every habit would go through these four laws or this four-step process. The cue, which is the first step, the craving, the response, and then the reward. The first law really touches on the cue piece to the puzzle, so that's essentially what we read, and the chapter summarized is basically can be summarized into like five different main ideas that really made up the chapter. Four of them being a method to create a good habit, and the fourth being a method to break a bad habit. So the first idea that they ran us through was the idea that you should write down your habits and try to take a more active approach to calling them out. The second idea is to use this notion of implementation intention, where you can use the phrase "I will" with a specific behavior at a certain time in a certain location, and this helps us really stick to our goals. And in parallel, James Clear brought up this idea of incorporating habit stacking, which is a method to combine different habits together so that you can turn desired behavior into simple tasks that you do every day. And the fourth idea and the final idea of creating a good habit is to promote good habits in a way that you place yourself in an environment that can foster your habits to grow for growth. For example, one of the examples that he gave in the book was about apples. He saw that when you keep your apples in the refrigerator, it was kind of hidden from him, and he wasn't able to go pick up an apple every day and go eat it every day because it was hidden in his environment. So changing the setting of that apple to like a countertop in his kitchen allowed him to eat more apples every day. So that was little example on changing your environment and how it can help foster growth. And on the flip side, looking at the fourth idea was that how to break a bad habit was to reduce the exposure of a bad habit. And it kind of touches on this environmental thing again. And it's about removing the cues from your environment. And one of the best examples was not being able to get your work done. And I know I've been like through this a lot where I would be like on my phone all the time doing like work or studying. And so in order to break that habit of just going on your phone while you're supposed to be doing something else, you leave that phone in another room and you walk away from it, or you put it out of reach, and that way it would enable yourself to remove that bad habit and kind of get into a better one with your environment. So with that being said, I kind of spoke a lot. Let me dive into some of the questions that I have. So I think I wanted to start with this one thing that I remember Matthew telling me before, which was calling something out and calling the action out, right? And you remember that? Remember at Toyota you did something when you walked behind each other? Do you want to like explain that topic a little bit?
Like
When you're walking on the
that's actually crazy because when I was reading like the chapter,
yeah,
that's like the first thing I thought of.
yeah,
And then I remember like I told you that. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So basically like at when I worked at Toyota, um and like obviously Toyota's like Japanese, right? So it's related to the book because they give an example of like how Japanese culture, it's customary to kind of call out what you're doing. Like as a worker, you want to call out what you're doing to kind of keep your mind engaged. But at Toyota, whenever we had to cross like walk out of designated walkways to like cross like a forklift path or whatever, we'd like point to the direction that we're going. And I thought it was because to like let the drivers know that we're walking that way, but it's also like for us to keep in mind that we're walking out of safety and like we have to be aware of where we are basically. So that was pretty cool.
I think in Japan they do that thing with the train too.
Yeah, I think
Like all
that's
the
true.
trains, they
Yeah.
point at it and be like,
Like going that way.
"Yeah, what's going on?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
Came full circle.
And I think with the concept of like pointing and calling, like we kind of incorporate that in our daily life too when it comes to kind of like when we leave the house, we check our pocket.
Yeah.
Or when we're at a restaurant, we want to make
Akban
sure.
does the classic would get on the subway.
I
When we
check
get-
everything.
When we get on the train, opens his wallet, It counts if he has every card.
Oh,
I'll always say
really?
the same
Yeah.
thing.
I used to do that.
But we're already on the train.
Wow.
Like,
When I get in the car, I just check wallet, check everything,
Oh,
the
shit.
keys.
Yeah, car keys and everything. Yeah. So I
That's
think it's
so-
something that like, it's like we're seeing it in the book, but
Yeah.
this is something we actually implement more pretty often.
Do you think it's effective or a nuisance? Idea.
Like that one in particular.
Yeah, or the idea in general. Do you think it's effective?
I mean, I think it's backed by like experimental data, so it's probably pretty useful.
Matthew is a man of facts.
But I remember, like I started doing it in public when I was walking with you.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah. We'd be walking in Waterloo, and Matthew would be like, "I'm going behind you." I'm like, "What?" Like, oh, okay. Have fun. Well, I guess it is a very effective way of like communicating what you're about to do. Okay, so let me flip it over to the next question, which is, what is everyone's thoughts on the second chapters, and does anyone have any disagreements or criticisms
Second chapter.
on the first law?
Oh, okay.
Second chapter. We read it,
Uh,
Do you guys see the confusion?
Why was there confusion?
Now, I may have misread the agenda, in which when it said chapter 2, it meant the whole section of the book and not just chapter 2 of that section. So I may be just a little bit behind. But, you know, I still came in because I wanted to bring my my thoughts, my opinions, all of the things that you guys say, you know, play devil's advocate, show support.
Good point. Good point.
you're unbiased because you didn't read it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So any thoughts or criticism?
I think one thing was like you know how he gave a story about like the horse, like there's a woman, and like she used to like.
He's like, I didn't hear about it.
Okay, guys, we know this already. I'll be the moderator.
No, and then every time she goes on the horse, she starts smoking,
All right.
right? And then she stopped going on the horse, and then
Yeah.
the smoking declined. She stopped smoking,
Mhm.
but as soon as she went back, she still had
The
that
craving.
urges.
Yeah.
But like, if you like apply that, like, there's some stuff we have to do every day, and sometimes we get like bad habits from doing those everyday tasks.
Mhm.
Like, if there's some way like you could like break those tasks, because I don't think his thing for breaking a bad habit was more about like just removing yourself from the environment.
Right. Right.
But there's a way to like, if you have to stay in that environment, like I guess there isn't really an answer. The only answer was, I think he said, like sheer will, grit, and stuff
Yeah.
at that point. But like, I wish there was something that could,
Mitigate.
mitigate that, or just some sort of like plan.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
So what, like, other than changing your environment?
yeah. So like, if you can't change your environment, if there's a task that you have to do every day, or like, let's say like in his case, like, you know how he had an apartment room and like he couldn't do like,
Much, yeah.
you know how he says each room you should have a designated spot,
Right,
But like,
right.
if you live in an apartment, you don't have that much spot. You have
Mhm.
like one work room, right? So like, in those situations, like, you have to do your work, you have to study in
Right.
one room, you have to like play video games in one
Mhm.
room. If there's a way to like mitigate like bad habits there, I
Right.
wish he gave like an action plan, or like there was something in there.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's easier said than done.
Yeah, it's easier.
Yeah.
I think it,
Yeah.
like his
like
thing was,
restricting cues.
yeah, I think his thing was more like just hard work at that point, like
Mhm.
just sheer willpower.
Yeah.
But, like, he even says that's hard in the book.
Anyone else with any thoughts on the chapter that we've read? Yeah, buddy.
I think it's pretty interesting that he said, or he basically said, we're a product of our environment, that we have less free will than what we think we have. Like when he mentioned, you know, you think you make a choice to like pick whatever cereal you want in the morning, but really it's like your environment that kind of chose that for you subconsciously. I don't know,
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty cool.
And I think he emphasizes a lot about environment in the
Yeah.
and like especially in the later chapters
Mhm.
of the first law. Like he
Yeah.
kind of emphasizes on the environment, and I kind of see that being like it's accurate, right?
Yeah.
Like if you were to move out by yourself to like your own place, your habits are gonna change as well, right? So like when you come home, you don't like you're not really focused on cooking, taking care of more of yourself. But when you go to a different environment where you're alone, you kind of forced to do these certain habits.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you had to share one key takeaway from the chapter with someone who hasn't read it, what would it be?
Let's reword the question.
So let's reword it a little bit. If we were to share one key takeaway with our friend Yirthakin,
So-
who hasn't read the chapter, what would you tell him about the chapter? Do you want to go start us off, Narajan?
Sure. I think to kind of understand your environment and see what, when you first get an understanding of your environment, kind of see what you can do to change, break bad habits, and kind of build on the good. Because I know he did mention in the chapter regarding stacking habits, and I think it's really easy. It's easy it's easier said than done, but I feel like it's an actual something you can actually implement in daily life. And he also mentioned like when you get up, you make a cup of coffee, and while after you make a cup of coffee, you meditate for a minute or two. Like if that's like a regular, if you can make that as like a daily habit, it's definitely doable. So I would say understand your environment and adjust accordingly.
Yeah, I was gonna say of like the key takeaway that read was restricting the certain cues because those trigger you to do those habits, but at the same time also substituting it with another good habit. So like saying, he had this formula where you would say like, oh, I'm gonna do this at this time at this location. You can use that as like a substitute instead of triggering the bad habit.
Yeah. And for me, I think that the most important chapter that spoke out to me, I'd say, was the secret of self-control. Because I think that if you're able to control the environment, it would allow, to similar to what Bison and Narajan said, it will allow you to prosper a little bit more in the future. And I think that one example with the phone, putting it in a different room simply would allow you to be just a little bit more productive, to be able to get things that you need to be done. Same thing with moving out. If you're able to move out, you feel like you have a little bit more control over what's going on, and I think that control allows you to get that energy boost to complete your task. So I think that's it for me. And Matthew?
I think for me, like the biggest takeaway was both the implementation, what's it called? Yeah, implementation, intentions, and habit stacking. I thought those were pretty cool. Basically saying that if you want to get into a habit of doing something, you should kind of tell yourself like when and where you want to do that thing, or you can pick a habit that you already do every day and kind of chain it or like add it onto that. So like say if you want to make it a habit to floss your teeth, you say every time I brush I will also floss. Right. So kind of like adds onto that habit, you know what I mean? Yeah, or just like setting a time and place to do something.
What happened?
I don't know.
It's because he said floss instead of floss, and they couldn't contain themselves.
Yeah, I think for me it was like just the importance of the environment on your cues. Like I think the cool not.
Yeah, keep going.
I think the example, like my favorite example in the book was where he was talking about the heroin.
Sorry, bro, that was funny.
I think the importance of environment in your cues was probably the most important, I guess, topic that I think that he talked about, because I think like my favorite example was the was the one where like the heroin addicts like that were part of the army.
Right. Oh,
Yeah,
they were like
The book is giving
like 15% of the army I think was like heroin addicted to heroin in the Vietnam War. That was big news, right? And then they did a study on it, and they found out like when you came back home, like 90% of them stopped doing heroin, which was, I think, like even now that's kind of like different from what we think. Like even I'm guilty of saying like
Heroin?
no. I'm like guilty of saying like,
Whoa.
yo, sheer will, if you have the willpower and stuff,
right.
you'll be fine. But I think it's mostly like the environment that
You're in. Yeah.
that really decides these things. So yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty.
And what
Yeah.
does Giddy think?
Yeah, I was gonna ask you if you
Important
can.
after hearing all those things.
So, as you know, fortunately, I didn't get to this part of the book. Based off what you guys are talking about and what you guys are saying, I think it makes sense. Like, if we're talking about from an aspect of like, do we disagree with anything about this part of the chapter? I think we can all say like what you guys have learned. Notice I didn't say we. Not yet. Well, I've learned now. I like you guys. I'm learning from them. So, yeah, no, I think for this chapter, it's safe to say we do agree with basically everything that he's saying. Especially I like Atavan's example of with the Vietnam war vets, and how really like your situation and the other things that you do around your habits, good or bad, is really like a really big factor, plays a really large role in like developing or having that habit in the first place, right? It makes sense. It could be a time where you're stressed. It could be a time where you're happy and you find yourself doing the same thing during those times. So I think like if you're trying to fix a bad habit or trying to start building a good one, that's one thing to really consider, right? Pairing it with like a certain moment that always happens to you every day, right? Like a cue.
Moving on into our last question is, what insights from the book could be applied to our book club, the next chapter? I think you want to start us off.
I think like for me, like it's just hard finding time to read sometimes. So maybe like putting the book in a place where I know I'll have spare time, like maybe like in my bed. Like, yeah. So like right before I see the book, I'll read a couple pages and then I can sleep right after. Habit stacking.
Yeah, I agree in a way. Setting a time and a place to read every night, like right before bed or whatever, just to keep myself engaged with the actual content of the book.
So one thing I could like sort of relate to is, sir, sir, may I continue, please? Thank you. No, one thing I could relate to, and sort of how we can bring for like, so basically, like for me, reading was like easier when it was about. I've obviously read.
You read.
I was just.
You're gonna finish the whole book
I
next time.
was given the wrong schedule, but anywho, no, it's just a little like anecdote. Like reading, obviously, okay. I don't know if you guys consider it reading, but it was like reading manga. It counts as reading. Anywho, it was easier, whenever I was commuting to school. Like it's something I would just do while I'm on the train, on the bus. But now I'm not really on the bus or train anymore, so it's kind of like that habit that I used to just like pick up my phone, pick up my book to read. I sort of like lost that habit because I wasn't doing the other thing. So I think a good insight is just finding the motivation, finding something to pair what I want my habit to pair with, to make things easier. What's something that I do or we do every day already that we can sort of incorporate that habit into?
Yeah, and I think Giddy hit it right on the nail for me. I think finding that cue that would lead us to read and push us to read. And for you, it might even be this book club meeting. Like for you, you might see that the next episode might drop another day, and then you'd want to read the book, follow along. We encourage that here at the next chapter. But for me, I think what's helped me and what I think I can do moving forward is I have the book on my phone now, and I will continue to have the book on my phone so that I don't have to always lug around like a big book. And sometimes I can do it when I'm like on the go or when I'm on like a treadmill or something. And I think that's something I will carry me forward as I move throughout the book club.
I think for me it's more of breaking a bad habit and removing something from the environment, which would be when I tend to read, I get distracted and I start picking up my phone, scrolling through TikTok or something like that in between. So it's more of like setting my phone at another place when I start to read. I feel like I can be more focused.
Yeah, I think like similar to Ataman's point, just like creating like habit stacking, like keep the book in a place where if you go to that certain environment, you're focused on reading and not doing anything else. And to like Vihisan's point, I face something similar. Like after I read a few pages, I would want to go on my phone and like Instagram for 5 minutes and go back to reading the remaining pages. But yeah, I think Yeah, that's
Good points. Good points. All in all. So a successful and slightly unsuccessful second
successful.
episode.
He
Well,
learned.
I think.
Oh, that's
I
true.
Why are we attacking Gideon so much?
You
know what?
The man,
That's
right?
true,
I
that's
think I've
true.
learned a lot. I also think I was able to give some input, even though I didn't read it.
Nah, you did great. You did great.
Because-
Well, maybe we
Good
should
job.
do this thing where like every week
One
this
person
one
one
person
minute.
doesn't read, and they have
What do
the
you know,
unbiased
guys?
opinion.
I was just ahead. I was ahead, and
Yeah. No, we did great. I think
Free
the
Giddy, man. He just didn't have the schedule.
I didn't have the right schedule. You're right.
yeah. So thank you for listening to the second episode of the first book on the next chapter, which is Atomic Habits, and we hope to see you for the next episode where we read the second law and we dive into
The second
crave-
law, not chapter.
yeah, the second law, where we dive into the craving piece to that habit loop. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Make sure you plot.